Wyoming Territory, June 1874. The buzzards circled low over the flats east of Elk Hollow, and that was enough to make Silas O'Dale pull his horse to a stop. The wind dragged heat and dust across the scrub, and his mare, Molly, shifted under him, uneasy. Silas narrowed his eyes toward the rise ahead. Something was wrong. He nudged Molly forward, rifle ready in its saddle scabbard, and crested the bluff. That was when he saw her. She was collapsed beside a half-dead horse, her dress torn, face blistered from sun and wind. Blood darkened her sleeve, and her boots were missing. She did not move. Silas was off his horse before thinking. "Ma'am," he called, crouching beside her. "Can you hear me?" She made a sound barely. A rasp, more breath than voice. He got water to her lips, steadying her head. "Easy. Just sip." Her eyes fluttered open, green and unfocused. "My boy," she whispered. "My son." Silas's chest tightened. "Where is he?" Her hand trembled as she pointed west. "Wagon. Broke apart. 3 days ago. I lost him." Silas looked around. No wagon, no child, no trail. But she was too far gone to press. He lifted her gently, careful with her wounds. She weighed next to nothing. "You are safe now," he promised. "I have a cabin not far." Her head lolled against his shoulder. "Name's Prudence." "Silas," he said, mounting with her in his arms. "You hold on, Prudence. I will take care of you." The cabin sat tucked into the lower pines north of Chokeberry Creek. Silas laid her on his own bed, stripped the bloodied sleeve from her arm, and cleaned the gash. It looked like a bullet graze fresh, but not deep. Her fever worried him more. He put water to boil, soaked a rag, and ran it across her face, her neck, her arms. Her skin was hot and dry, and her breathing shallow. He sat through the night, changing the cloth, keeping her alive by sheer will. By dawn, she was cooler. Her eyes opened fully. "You stayed," she said, voice stronger. "You nearly died out there," he said plainly. "You were alone?" Her lips trembled. "No. I have 2 children, Jesse and Joelle. We were headed to Fort Bridger. My husband died last winter in Missouri. I thought we could start over." Silas's stomach dropped. "You said your son was missing." She nodded. "He ran after the wagon broke. He was chasing our mule. I went after him, but I passed out. Joelle was with me. She is only 6. Her voice cracked. "If they are out there, we will find them," Silas said. She stared at him like she wanted to believe that. He stood, already gathering supplies. "You are safe here. I have broth on the stove. Eat what you can. I will ride now. I will bring them back." The sun was high when Silas found the shattered wagon. It had tumbled down a rocky hill near the edge of the creek. The mule was long gone. But there, in the shadow of a cottonwood, was a boy, maybe 10 years old. He held a stick like a weapon. Behind him, a little girl clung to his shirt. Silas dismounted, hands raised. "Your mother is alive. She is at my cabin." The boy's face broke, just for a moment, before he looked wary again. "Who are you?" "Silas O'Dale. I found her near dead yesterday. She told me your names. Jesse and Joelle, right?" Jesse hesitated, then nodded. "She is really alive?" "She is waiting for you." The boy dropped the stick. He scooped up Joelle and walked to Silas without another word. Prudence cried when she saw them. Weak as she was, she still sat up, pulled both children tight, and kissed their dirt-caked faces through tears. Silas turned away to give them privacy, but her hand caught his. "Thank you," she whispered. He only nodded, throat thick. That night, he cooked rabbit stew. The children ate like they had not seen food in days. Prudence took slow spoonfuls, her hand still shaking. Silas poured her tea and made a bed for the children on the floor near the hearth. Later, after the fire dimmed and the children slept, Silas brought her another blanket. She looked at him over the edge of her cup. "You live out here alone?" "I do. No wife." He shook his head. "Not in a long time." "How long?" Silas hesitated. 6 years. She died in childbirth. The boy died too. Prudence's eyes softened. "I am so sorry." He looked away. "I did not talk about it for a long time. You are the first person I have told in years." She reached her fingers toward his, just a brush, but it stayed there. Warm. Real. "Thank you for saving me," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "You are worth saving." Over the next week, Prudence grew stronger. She helped clean, taught Joelle to sweep with a pine branch, and even laughed once when Jesse tried to fish and fell in the creek. Silas watched her, the way she moved through his world like she belonged to it. The way her hands steadied when she braided Joelle's hair. The way she smiled, even after all she had lost. He found himself listening for her voice, waiting for her to look at him again. One evening, after supper, she stepped out onto the porch where he sat sharpening his knife. Silas. He looked up. She touched the edge of the rail. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me. He stood slowly. You do not have to thank me anymore. I am not trying to thank you. Her voice was soft. I am trying to tell you something. He waited. I feel safe here, she said. With you. He stepped closer, heart thudding. I thought I would never trust a man again, she said. But you are different. He reached out, brushing a curl from her cheek. I lost everything once. I never thought I would feel again. Her hand found his. But you do now? He nodded. She leaned in, and he kissed her, gentle, uncertain, but real. Her fingers curled into his shirt, and he held her close, not as a man who saved her, but as a man who was falling in love. And she kissed him back, not as someone who owed him, but as someone who wanted him fully, honestly. When they pulled back, she whispered, I want to stay. He pressed his forehead to hers. Then stay. With me. She smiled, tears in her eyes. You are the only place I feel whole again. And as night fell around them, Silas knew without question that he had found what he never expected again. Something worth living for. Someone worth loving. In the weeks that followed, life shifted like the slow turning of a wagon wheel across dry earth, steady, deliberate, and with the weight of something real behind it. Silas built a second bed frame from pine timbers, setting it beside the hearth where the children had been sleeping. Prudence stitched a mattress from burlap sacks and stuffed it with dry grass and wool, her fingers nimble even when swollen from old breaks. She taught Jessie how to patch seams and showed Joelle how to fold flour sacks into aprons. No one said anything about staying, not directly, but roots had a way of settling into soil without needing permission. One morning, Prudence stood at the edge of the garden patch, sleeves rolled and hands deep in the earth. Silas watched from the corral, the smell of horse sweat thick in the warming air. You ever plant beans this late? She asked, not looking up. Only when I'm feeling lucky. She straightened, brushing dirt from her palms. Well, I figure luck's just persistence that hasn't given up yet. He smiled at that, but his voice stayed quiet. You were planning on Fort Bridger. You still want to go? She shook her head. No, I was planning on survival. That's different. Jessie came running then, shouting about a broken fence down by the creek. Silas saddled up and rode out with him, teaching the boy how to brace a post with rock and wire, how to spot where elk had rubbed through. Jessie listened close, eyes sharp, hands calloused now. Not once did he complain about the work. Later that day, when the sun dipped low and the wind tugged smoke from the chimney, Prudence stepped into the barn where Silas was oiling the harness leather. I found this in my bundle, she said, holding out a folded square of paper. It's a deed. 40 acres near La Barge. My husband bought it before he passed. Silas took the paper, careful not to smudge the ink. You mean to settle there? I don't know. Her voice was thoughtful, not uncertain. I just figured you should know. It's ours. Was his dream. He handed it back. Dreams shift. She tucked it away. So do hearts. He didn't answer, but she stayed beside him as he worked, and the silence between them felt anything but empty. That night, a storm rolled in from the west, lightning first, then wind, then the kind of rain that found every crack in the roof. Jessie curled under a quilt with Joelle beside him, both too worn from hauling firewood to stir. Prudence stood at the window, watching the sky. You afraid of thunder? Silas asked, pouring 2 cups of coffee from the kettle. I used to be, she said, taking one. When I was little, my father would say thunder was just the sky reminding us it's still alive. That sounds like something a man would say to keep from admitting he was scared too. She laughed, low and tired. He was a drunk and a liar, but I liked that one. Silas leaned against the table. You close with him? No. He was cruel. My mother died when I was young, and he raised me mean. I ran off at 16 with a farmhand named Everett. Thought I was escaping. Turned out I just found a different kind of hard. Silas didn't ask what kind. It was in her eyes, things endured, not spoken. You ever think about going back? He asked. There's nothing back there for me. What I want now is something quiet. Something that doesn't hurt to hope for. He looked at her then, really looked not as the woman he'd rescued, not as the mother of 2 children, but as a person learning to feel safe again. "I can give you quiet," he said. She held his gaze, steady as the rain on the roof. "Can you give me peace?" He walked to her, slow, deliberate. "I can try." She reached up, touched his face, fingers warm from the cup she still held. "Then I'll stay." They stood close, the storm muffling the world outside. And when he kissed her, it wasn't like the first time, tentative, unsure. This was something fuller, shaped by days of shared labor, nights of quiet understanding, and a trust built without rush. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead to his. "I don't need a deed to feel like I belong somewhere." "You belong here," he said. Her breath caught, but she nodded. "And you belong with me." He didn't answer in words. He just wrapped his arms around her and held her through the storm, through the creaking of the old cabin, through the thunder that rolled like memory across the mountains. Outside, the creek swelled with rain, and the earth drank deep. Inside, the fire burned steady, and 2 lives began to grow roots slow, strong, and sure. By late July, the high country began to brown. The creek pulled back into itself, and the pine shadows stretched longer across the sloping land. The cabin, once spare and silent, now echoed faintly with the sounds of a life being lived, wooden spoons against tin bowls, Joelle's humming while she twisted grass dolls, Jesse's boots thudding as he ran messages between chores. Silas sat on the porch rail sharpening a draw knife, watching the children chase each other around the chicken yard. Prudence stepped out behind him, sleeves pushed up, a sun hat in one hand. "They've taken to this place like it's always been theirs," she said. He glanced toward the yard. "They've got grit. Both of them." She lowered herself to the bench beside the door, brushing sawdust from the hem of her skirt. "You know, Jesse asked me yesterday what it means to be good enough." Silas looked up. "What did you say?" "I told him it's not something someone else can measure. That it's how you carry your word, how you bear up when things don't go your way." He nodded slowly. "That sounds like something a man ought to hear early." Prudence turned her face toward the trees. "My first winter with Everett, we lost our first calf to a wolf. He blamed me. Said I didn't latch the pen right, even though he'd been the one to do it." Silas didn't interrupt. "I believed him. For years. Believed every hard thing he said about me." "You don't anymore?" "I'm trying not to." He studied her, the faint white ridge above her eyebrow where a scar had faded into her skin. "You haven't said much about him. He's buried in Missouri. Caught fever last December. I nursed him through it, but it took him anyway." Silas looked away, jaw tight. "He ever raise a hand to you?" She folded her fingers in her lap. "Just enough that I learned not to speak unless it was useful." The wind picked up, rustling dry grass along the fence. "I don't know how to be with someone who listens," she said. "Sometimes that scares me more than the rest ever did." Silas set the draw knife down. "You don't owe me anything. Not talk, not quiet, not staying. If you ever want to ride out, you say the word." She turned to him. "You think I'm still looking for a reason to leave? I think you've had more taken from you than given. That kind of weight doesn't lift easy." She tilted her head. "You ever think about leaving this place?" He shook his head once. "I built it for a life I didn't get to live. Took me a long time to stop being angry about that. And now, I've got something to build again. Something different." Joelle had wandered up, holding a broken feather. "Mama, this came from the tall bird behind the barn." Prudence took it carefully. "That's a turkey feather, sweetheart. We'll use it for a fanning fan when it gets hot again." Joelle grinned and darted back off. "She's not afraid of anything," Silas said. "She's learned to keep going." "That's not the same as not being afraid." He reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. "I want to build something with you," he said. "Not just walls and fences. Something that holds." She met his gaze. "Then let's build it together. But slow. I need slow." He nodded. "I've got all the time you need." That night, the children curled into their straw mattress, whispering about a coyote they'd glimpsed near the ridge. Prudence sat cross-legged on the floor beside them, smoothing Joelle's hair until her eyes closed. Silas lit a lantern and set it low on the table. When Prudence rose, she crossed the room and stood close to him. "I never knew quiet could feel like this," she said. "Not empty. Just still." He touched her shoulder, gentle. "I won't rush you." She leaned into him, her cheek against his chest. "You already know how to give me what I never dared ask for." He wrapped his arms around her. Outside, the wind eased. Inside, the hush between them turned warm. And in that stillness, with the children safe and the night stretching wide, Prudence began to believe that peace wasn't something fragile, not if it was built with care, and not if it was shared with a man who knew how to listen. August settled on the land with a dry hush. The heat pressed down in the hours before dusk, and flies clung to damp shirts and horse bellies. Silas had taken to working the fence line early and coming in by midday, letting the sun fall before he set out again. That afternoon, he and Jesse had finished mending the east corral, and the boy had gone to fetch water while Silas rubbed the mare's flank with a burlap cloth soaked in creek mud. Inside, Prudence knelt near the hearth, pouring a jar of dried corn into a basin. Her movements were slow but sure, sleeves hiked above her elbows, hair wrapped in a red kerchief Joelle had found wedged behind a rafter. The girl sat nearby, humming to herself as she snapped beans into a basket. Silas stepped into the doorway, wiping his neck with a handkerchief. Hawk took a hen this morning. Found feathers and tracks near the ash tree. Prudence didn't pause. We'll need to string oilcloth over the roost. I saw some in the barn loft if it hasn't rotted through. I'll check it after supper. He looked toward Joelle. You see anything out there when you fetched eggs? She shook her head, her voice light. Just a shiny beetle. Jesse said it was lucky. Prudence looked over. He also told you if you swallowed a plum pit you'd grow a tree from your belly. Joelle giggled and tucked her knees under her chin. Silas leaned on the doorframe. You always run your house like this? Prudence stood, wiping her palms on her apron. Like what? Like it's part of the land. Quiet, but never still. She met his eyes, something unreadable flickering there. I never got to run anything before. Not really. He stepped inside and set the cloth on the table. You're doing more than running it. You're shaping it. She didn't answer for a long while. Then, softly, I used to believe I wasn't meant to last. That some women just get used up along the way. You're not used up. Her eyes lifted to meet his. I'm starting to believe that. That evening, after the sun dipped and the cook fire had burned down to coals, Prudence brought out the old fiddle case she'd found tucked beneath the bed frame. The varnish had dulled and the strings were loose, but she handled it like a friend long missed. This belonged to my uncle, she said, tuning by ear. He played at barn dances when I was small. Silas watched her fingers move with quiet confidence. Did he teach you? I listened through the walls. He never knew. She tested a string, adjusted a peg. I haven't touched one in years. Might be it sounds more like a dying cat than music. I'll take the risk. She tucked it under her chin and drew the bow slow and careful, coaxing out a hesitant waltz. The first few measures wavered, but then it settled, and the cabin filled with a sound that made Joelle sit up and Jesse leaned forward, mouth open. When she finished, Joelle clapped, and Jesse grinned. Prudence flushed, lowering the fiddle to her lap. You've been holding out, Silas said, voice low. She smiled without looking up. I didn't know I still had it in me. A breeze slipped through the open window, carrying the scent of pine and dry sage. Silas stood and reached out his hand. Dance with me. She hesitated, then nodded once. He led her to the center of the room, stepping slow, letting her guide the rhythm. Her right hand rested in his, her left on his shoulder, light as breath. The children watched from the corner, whispering behind cupped hands. Silas leaned close. You're not afraid of much anymore, are you? I'm still afraid, she said. But not of you. They danced until the fire burned low and Joelle fell asleep against Jesse's side. Prudence rested her head on Silas's chest, their steps slowing until they stopped altogether. Outside, the stars stretched clear and sharp across the black. Inside, the cabin held the warmth of more than just fire. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Stay with me. Not for now. For good. She looked up at him, her voice steady. I already have. And in that quiet room, with the wind moving gently through the trees and the earth cooling beneath them, the life they'd begun stopped feeling like recovery. It started feeling like home. By mid-September, the land began to change its face. The wind came down from the high peaks with a new edge, and the cottonwoods along the creek turned yellow, their leaves loosening like old promises. The days shortened, but the work didn't. Silas split wood in the mornings, while Jesse hauled it into the lean-to. Prudence had begun drying apples and laying up root vegetables in the cool dark of the cellar. Joelle helped shell beans at the table, her small fingers quick and proud. One morning, as Prudence was rolling dough for the winter's first batch of biscuits, Silas stepped in with a folded paper in hand. His coat smelled of frost and damp pine. "I rode to the post yesterday," he said, laying the note on the table beside her dough board. "The man who sold you that deed's out in Law Barge still. Runs cattle now. There's a homestead marker on the land. Fenced in, too. Looks like someone's been squatting." She dusted her hands clean. "You spoke to him?" "Briefly. He says he'll clear out by winter, but he's not in a hurry. Claims he didn't know it changed hands." She leaned her hip against the table, lips pressed tight. It was never about the land. Everett bought it to prove something, that he could own something bigger than himself. Silas waited. She looked at him, thoughtful. "I don't need to chase something that wasn't mine to begin with. What we've built here that's not borrowed. That's ours." He nodded, and the matter closed between them like a latch falling home. That same week, a traveling preacher passed through on his way to Green River. He'd stopped for water and left with a belly full of stew. Before riding on, he'd offered a blessing over the house. As he mounted up, he'd tipped his hat toward Prudence and said, "If you ever want it spoken proper, I'd be honored to return." Prudence hadn't answered right away, but that evening, as the wind rose and the sky turned the color of cooling iron, she stood in the doorway and said, "I think I'd like to be married in the fall, before the ground hardens." Silas looked up from where he was smoothing a new saddle strap. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He rose, walked to her, and took both her hands in his. "Then let's do it right." The preacher returned a week later. Jesse wore a collar too big for his neck, and Joelle carried a jar of wild asters tied with twine. Prudence wore the same dress she'd arrived in, clean now, patched at the hem, with a strip of lace she'd sewn along the cuffs. Silas had shaved and combed his hair, though he'd muttered about the foolishness of it. They stood under the cottonwood near the creek. The leaves fell around them like gold coins, and the preacher's words were simple and earnest. When it came time, Silas didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, before the preacher had finished the question. Prudence smiled, tears in her lashes. "Yes," she whispered. They signed their names in the preacher's book. Jesse pressed his mark beside theirs, serious and proud, while Joelle clapped like she'd seen something holy. That night, the cabin felt different. Not just lived in, but claimed. A home, not just a shelter. After the children had gone to sleep, Prudence and Silas sat close by the hearth. She laid her head against his shoulder, her fingers tracing slow circles on his hand. "I used to think love was something you had to earn by being quiet or useful or small," she said. He turned toward her, voice quiet. "And now I know love's a place. It's this. It's being seen and still being wanted." He kissed her then, slow and steady, the way the river moved around stones. She leaned into it, into him, into the life they'd made. They slept that night in each other's arms, the wind rattling gently at the shutters, the fire burning low but sure. No ghosts hung between them, no old names, just the promise of morning. Years passed. Jesse grew tall and sure-handed, and when he turned 20, he bought a team of geldings with money earned from hauling timber. He built a cabin of his own along the western ridge and married a girl from the canyon settlement who taught school in the winter. Joelle raised chickens and read every book that passed through Elk Hollow. She never married but stayed close, always bringing butter and stories, always returning before the sun went down. The cabin changed over time. The roof was redone with cedar shakes. A second room was added when Joelle turned 16. The garden doubled, then tripled. Silas built a smokehouse with Jesse one summer, and Prudence planted lilacs along the porch. When they bloomed, the whole valley smelled of something soft and clean. In the evenings, Silas and Prudence still danced. Sometimes to fiddle, sometimes to nothing at all. Just the sound of boots on wood and the whisper of cloth and breath. They grew old as the land did, gently, without apology. Their hands stayed calloused, their backs sometimes stiff, but their love never dulled. It deepened, the way rivers do when they carve through rock and find, at last, the quiet basin meant for them. And in that place, in that quiet, steady life, they were happy, truly and always.